find in the Old Testament reading from Joshua, the mercies of God are expressed in this way in which the people have crossed the River Jordan or into the promised land, and manna, the bread from heaven, is no longer provided for them because the blessings of God are to be found on the land. They are able to harvest the produce of the land, and that is an even greater blessing than manna. And that's a sign to you and to me that the blessings of God come to us in the everyday events and experiences and the provisions which God gives us through providing our daily bread. And how we should be deeply thankful for this, more so than even the glorious divine manna from heaven. Because the divine is to be found in the land, where we are, in the here and now, and in the produce and the blessings which God gives to you and to me. And then in our epistle reading, we hear that the mercies of God are demonstrated by Christ reconciling the world to himself. That somehow or other, the work of Christ, which we're going to delve deeply into as we approach Holy Week and Good Friday, the work of Christ has a purpose of reconciling the world to God. And we begin to see an illustration of this in our gospel reading. In our gospel reading, the reading begins at the very opening of the 15th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel. And we find out that Jesus is being criticized because of the company he keeps. According to the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus is keeping bad company. A holy person should not be doing such a thing. And Jesus begins to tell three parables, three stories, to explain and to justify his actions. Story of the lost sheep, the story of the lost coin, and then the story we've heard today of the lost son. Jesus is explaining through story what that work of reconciliation might look like in the world. What that work of reconciliation is about by being inclusive, by welcoming everyone, and being able to offer that welcome, whatever the criticism, whatever the cost. And as we move from that story, we then move in the course of the next few weeks to the story of the true cost of this, of Jesus reconciling you and me and the world to God through his death on the cross. But in the story, we find the mercies of God flooding through, particularly in the actions of the Father. The younger son decides he's had enough at home. I don't know if you've ever experienced that when you're growing up. You know, you just had enough. Parents getting on your nerves, you're frustrated, you feel trapped, you just want to be done with it, you just want to get out. And we find that the son makes an extraordinary demands to receive his portion of the inheritance from the father. In Middle Eastern culture, this just does not happen. Because if it were to happen and you were to ask for your inheritance in that culture, you're basically asking for the father to be dead. Because you want to get the inheritance now. You want to benefit from the estate. I love watching a program on television. It was on Friday night. It's called Beyond Paradise, and of course it's situated in Devon and Cornwall with picturesque scenery in a pretty fishing village, and there's always a murder to be solved, and the police always solve it. It's remarkable. And within this story, one of the police officers has got a teenager who is a young girl who likes working in the local cafe. And of course, mom thinks that her daughter should be studying for her exams. And so every now and then, the mum wanders into the cafe and upbraids the daughter in front of the people who are employing her and also the people who are attending the cafe. So this happens in the last episode, and the daughter looks up at her mum very sweetly and says, "You know, Mum, I'm thinking of divorcing you." And the mum, as quickly as anything, says, "And I will sue you for maintenance." Here we have a breakup in the family between the father and the younger son. We hear that the father actually gives the inheritance. He not only gives the inheritance to the younger son, but also to the older son as well. Here we see something of the mercies of God. Because in that Middle Eastern culture, that just would not happen. You wouldn't sign over your inheritance while you were still alive. You just wouldn't do it. You would upbraid the son for making an impossible and unreasonable request. And so we see the mercies of God in granting that free will, that freedom to the younger son. And in our Going Deeper meetings on Zoom on Wednesday evenings, we've been really trying to figure out, why does God give us such freedom? It doesn't make sense. We've got all this freedom, and look what we do with it. But here we have a story. The loving, merciful father gives the freedom. And of course the younger son goes off and he loses the fortune that he's been given. And he gets into such a state that he realizes that he'd be better off back on the family farm. He knows he can no longer be a son, but he could offer himself to be a slave. And he knows he'd be treated better in what he's experiencing out in the world. He thought the grass was greener on the other side, but he's been rudely awakened to how harsh it is to be on his own in a far-off country where there is famine. And so he returns home, going to plead with his father to take him on as an employee. And then what we see in the story is the merciful God. The father hears that this wayward son is returning home, and he runs through the village to embrace him. Now, in Middle Eastern culture, if you are a person of honor, if you own a farm, if you own property, you don't run ever. There's no jogging in the Middle East in the ancient world. It's a sign of, you don't do that. You walk in a measured gait. That is a sign of your position in the society. And so the father humiliates himself by running through the village to embrace the son. And it's important to remember that the village is now involved. Just not this family which has got this dysfunction and pain within it. The village is involved and observing what is happening. Because the village would have heard what the younger son had done, and they would have been appalled. And they would have rejected that younger son. They would never want to see him again. Perhaps that's why he left so quickly. He would be an outcast from the village. And here we have the father, through his mercy, bringing the finest garment, the garment that he, the father, would wear at great occasions, great celebrations. That garment, that's going to be put on the son. He's going to be given footwear, sandals, another sign of merit, and he's kissed on the cheek. Here we have the father showing the village how the son is to be treated and respected, included and welcomed back into the community. And more than that, there's going to be a great party. The fatted calf is going to be prepared in bread ovens, and it's going to be shared. Now, if you have a party and have a sheep or a goat in the Middle East, you welcome family and friends. If you have the fatted calf, you invite the whole village. You can't all eat it by yourself. It's not possible. You invite the whole village, which is why in the story there is singing and dancing, because as the calf is being prepared in the ovens, the party begins. Here we have the mercies of God, seen in this father to the younger son. And not only that, but the older son experiences the mercies of God. He may not respond positively to it, but the older son in the story comes back and is furious once he hears what's going on. Furious, jealous, resentful. And he speaks harshly to his father. Now, in a Middle Eastern culture, when you speak to your father, you start off by saying father. You just don't burst in with what's on your mind. You start off by saying father. That doesn't happen in this story. The son, the older son, insults his father by not even mentioning his name. And the father responds through his mercy by saying, child, word teknon, my child. Here we have a father with two lost children. One has gone away and spent a fortune and lost it. The other stayed at home, but has built up a huge well of hatred and resentment and anger, and is lost. Even though he's still at home, he is lost too. Lost in his own thoughts, lost in his emotions. And the father, being merciful, tries to welcome that elder son to the party. The mercies of God are here today for you and for me. Some of us may be wayward like that younger son. Some of us may be all pent up with a whole emotional agenda, all piled inside us, all knotted up inside us, like the older son. But the mercies of God are there to welcome you, whatever state you're in, so that you can come back and be welcomed with honor by a loving Father. And through that action of the loving Father, we see something of this work of reconciliation. God is in Christ reconciling the world to himself. And we find that in that passage from St. Paul's epistle, it goes on to say that we are called to be ambassadors for Christ. We too are called to carry on the work of reconciling the world to God. We're in a world where, in many areas of life, we're hearing, I've done with it. I've had enough of you. If it's the WHO, I've had enough of it. If it's the World Trade Organization, I've had enough of it. We want different rules. If it's the United Nations, we've had enough of it. We want to do something different. If it's NATO, no, it's no good anymore. We want to do it this way. This is the world we're in. And we don't know what the consequences of these changes will be. But there may be a bad ending in many outcomes. And we are called as a church to be like the loving Father. As things go wayward or haywire, we are called to wait patiently, to pray patiently, to yearn for the world to be reconciled to God. But there are times when we're also called to pick up the pieces, to put the world back together again, so that the righteousness of God is seen in our world. And St. Paul is very clear that we are God's righteousness. We are God's righteousness. The justice of God is to be located in you and me and our actions and our decision making. Our actions and decision making are crucial. So we can see what's happening in terms of the need for reconciliation on the world stage. You may know what is needed in terms of your family or in terms of your place of work. You are called to be an agent of reconciliation, of healing, of showing the mercies of God. you and I do that, then indeed it has an impact. But we need to be aware that it is a costly path. One of the things I'd like you to do in the course of the next week or so is to invite any other member of Emmanuel whom you haven't seen around in church for some time. Invite them back for Palm Sunday and Good Friday and Easter, because we need to do this together. We need to be the people of God together, recognizing the cost of this ministry of reconciliation, the cost of Christ's sacrificial death. If you do that, you are being an agent of reconciliation, restoring all to the fold, and enabling us to live a life where there is indeed party and joy and gladness. And I'm delighted today that we can indeed party at the end of our worship. So let us celebrate the mercies of God and the reconciling love of God.